I'm Megan Skidmore, and welcome to the Beyond the Shadow of Doubt. I'm a woman, daughter, sister, spouse, mother, life coach, and person of faith on a mission to normalize asking questions and allowing doubts on a faith journey and all aspects of life. Join me as I bring this traditionally taboo topic out of the shadows of shame and into the light. I firmly believe we normalize through more talking and engaging in discussion. More talking peels back, exposes, and erases the layers of shame associated with asking questions and allowing doubts. When we are more authentic about our journey, we are more powerful because shame has no power in the face of authenticity. Story mapping is a key component of my signature program, Life Outside the Binary. When you experience an awakening and see for yourself that the world is not all black and white, you get to choose which of your long-held stories align and live outside the ones that don't. Have you hit a wall and simply cannot figure out what to do to move past, or feel stuck and unsure of what your next move is or how to find it? Did you know the real challenge isn't the wall or the feeling stuck, but rather the story you have written and are living in about yourself and about the wall and about the feeling of stuckness? What you tell yourself about your value, character, abilities, and power to work through and move past problems, concerns, walls, or feeling stuck could be what is really in the way. The thing is, most of us can't see these stories for ourselves. That's where I come in. I invite you to join me for a story mapping session. You will gain more than insight, clarity, and at least one tool you can start using today. You'll remember or learn for the first time how to breathe again. You will start to feel a glimmer of hope and sense possibilities. You'll start to see where your stories end and you begin. Nothing is off limits in our 75-minute intensive. The link is in the show notes. First Friday's free coaching, a confidential group to bring all the questions, vent frustrations, share fears, express doubts. Navigating a new and uncertain reality is hard enough. Let's remove the worry of judgment from others. In this group, I will help you help yourself so that you can be there for your child, family, loved ones, and for you too. Click the link in the show notes to sign up. You must complete the agreement. Here we go. Welcome, everyone, to Beyond the Shadow of Doubt podcast. I'm Megan Skidmore, your host. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to be here today. You will not be disappointed. I have a new friend with me today, Emily Renshaw, and I am so excited, Emily, to get your story recorded because it hit me like wildfire. No pun intended, maybe intended. I don't know. You'll understand better as you listen to the episode. Really, it was so powerful, your story, when I recently read it on an Instagram account, actually, someone who I've also recently interviewed, Amy Jensen, who runs the Women on the Stand account. So welcome, Emily.
Thank you.
I want to give you as much time as we can. So I'm going to turn the time over to you to introduce yourself, your upbringing, who you are, your background, where you're from, faith, profession, education, whatever you would like to include.
Okay, absolutely. So I've been married for 20 years to a wonderful guy. We'll be celebrating 21 here, probably by the time this publishes. And we have 4 kids. So our oldest daughter is at Iowa State University studying chemistry and dietetics. And then we have 2 in high school. So we have a senior and a sophomore, and then a big gap and a 4th grader. And as a family, we love the outdoors and we love to travel. So we've made international travel a priority. In the last 3 years, as the kids get ready to leave, we're in a place of privilege to do so. And as parents, our goal was to, one, show them that the world is not scary, but also to have them just for a moment be in that place of discomfort where they don't know the language and they don't know the systems, and just kind of see the world through firsthand experience. My degree is in landscape architecture. And so I've been tied to the land for a long time. Currently, I'm a director at a small nonprofit, and we focus on nutrient-dense foods. So a lot of things that people don't know about Iowa, they know that we farm here. We have 23 million acres of corn and soybeans, but we also import 95% of our food because all of those fields go to cattle feed and ethanol. And so we have a very high food insecurity rate here in the Midwest. And so My life work right now is to connect communities to vegetables. Essentially, I get to work with farmers who have immigrated in from all over the world to grow things that they can't find in our local grocery stores. So that's what I do. Half of my job is in the field, and the other half is kind of in the boardroom. And so I get the best of both worlds doing that.
That is amazing. I love to garden. I bet you have one heck of a garden.
I do not. It's like 10 by 10 feet because by the time I get home, the last thing I want to do is garden anymore.
I can only imagine. Yeah. What a fantastic career. What a fantastic profession. Thank you for doing that. Thank you for bringing light to those important economic and political issues. And today, however, we're here to talk about something a little different, although symbolically related, I guess. My goal with this podcast, one of them, is to normalize how beautiful each of our faith journeys are, and they're not supposed to look like carbon copies of one another, and that allowing questions and embracing them, leaning into them, allowing doubts, all of that is part of it. That's actually where the growth, the refining, the stretching occurs. That said, I would like for you to share, about your faith journey. When questions and doubts have come up for you, how have you navigated that? Maybe it was different at one point, earlier in life than it is now. It's evolved, perhaps. What is your approach when you find something that just, it doesn't make sense, it doesn't match up, doesn't resonate with you?
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe I'll back up just a little bit and
Okay.
talk a little bit about my upbringing. So I
Okay.
grew up in Northeast Iowa. To put it into perspective of how rural this area is, our county doesn't have a stoplight, and the nearest Target is an hour and a half away. So I grew up in a very tight, but small community, and my parents were Lutheran, and they joined the church in the 1980s. And so I was young, I was 4 or 5 years old. And so they joined this tiny little branch. This branch at the time was from east to west, an hour and a half drive, and north to south, about 2 hours, not the stake, the branch.
Wow.
And, their story is really interesting. But I think what that did is I grew up where the church was like a community, but not the community. I grew up the only kid. I have one brother. We're 7 years apart. But I grew up the only kid in our school district. We were the only LDS family in our town. Because of the proximity to church, we had mutual once a month, maybe twice during the summer. Seminary was home study, like paper before the days of the internet, right? And so I grew up in this community where religions kind of, melded. And as my parents transitioned out of farming, they started a tombstone shop. And so they were stone carvers for the last 25 years of their career. And it was a family business. And so I had the opportunity to work in there. And during my teenage years, really saw firsthand, got an in-depth look at grief. And as you talk to families, right? So it's after the funeral, everyone's left and gone back to their normal lives. And then, individuals are in this transition and this next step of life. And I can remember that time being in seminary and having the lesson on, the Holy Ghost will come and comfort or do whatever he needs to do, and then he leaves. But then I was having this very real experience with these daily interactions with individuals where you heard a different story, right? You heard that different names, but what the comforter was to them was kind of this unseen, unknown power that didn't just come and go, that it had stayed for days and weeks, and for many times years, because we know death doesn't start, when the heart ends, it begins as we start to lose the person who we're connected to. And so I think from a very young age, I'm very grateful for my parents. There was place for questions and this discussion of different beliefs and religions. And, spirituality and religion outside of ours wasn't a scary place. It was part of the community and something to be respected. However, as I got older, I attended Iowa State University. And I think for the first time, that's probably where I felt being the othered in the church. I was accepted to BYU. I went and I visited. It felt very stifling at the time. And I just remember everyone saying, like, oh, this is, you'll go on campus and this is where you feel like, you will need to be. And I remember having that experience, not at BYU, but at Iowa State. And I remember how incredibly disappointed people were that I was not choosing the church school. And I think just just the reaction of maybe you're in the wrong and this is not right.
Mm-hmm.
But as I went to Iowa State, we had a great singles branch, met my husband there. We very much fell into an LDS pattern. We got married at the beginning of our senior year, which was fairly typical for church culture, not typical for the Midwest. And he came from a much more Orthodox background, and we kind of followed that suit. So I would say from my college years on, I really followed the approach of putting everything on the shelf, shelve it with the promise that with time, those answers would come and those questions would be relieved. And after 2 decades, my questions and that shelf, the weight on that shelf continued to mount. What I did not know is my partner, who had served as a bishop in his early 30s, who was, did all the priesthood callings, was really a staple for church leadership, that his own shelf was crumbling. And when his shelf broke, it broke hard. And we both kind of stood in the shattered pieces and realized that this is something that could be rebuilt and never mended, right? We could rebuild with something new that we could never fix. And I think for me, that's where I really needed to look at what was too heavy for me. And that experience started to force me to take things off, start digging into my own questions to make sure that the same thing didn't happen. So I'm a systems person. I work in food systems. I love systems. And so, when you ask, what do you do when you find something you don't understand? I make a system. And my system was, and still is today, what are my parameters? What is my end goal? And at that time, my end goal was to stay fully engaged with the church. And my parameters were that I would read things that weren't necessarily of opinion, right? So kind of go to the source, whether that's on the church website or through solid historians, and start to work my way through. And then to give myself space, that when things became too heavy and too complicated, that I didn't put a timeline on myself, that I would give myself time and space to sit down and be able to go through this at my own pace.
I love that. I'm curious. I'm curious to know, what do you think putting those systems in place accomplished for you? Like, how did it serve you?
Yeah, so that's a good question. Keep in mind, as I start this process, I am fairly new into a mixed faith marriage. My spouse, who between the two of us was the much more Orthodox one, is in the process of completely stepping away from the church. And we have teenagers, right? And so you're trying to navigate this faith transition and starting to open up, your own questions and concerns, and then still trying to keep the household together, right? Especially with teenagers, which is a complexity in its own realm. And so I think for me, honestly, it was, I had to put some guidelines on there because it couldn't be all consuming, right? At this point, I had returned to the workforce. I was working full time. I have 4 kids. We're trying to navigate this new space. And so by putting a system and a framework, it allowed me to kind of bite off bite-sized chunks of this really massive mountain of information that I was starting to stare down. And I think it also gave me just the ability to stop and rest when needed, and not just have to barrel through full speed. Did it find the balance that I was looking for? Not always. But I think for myself and how my brain works, it was very helpful to help kind of compartmentalize a lot of the different issues and be able to, do it in a way that wasn't completely crushing.
For sure. Well, kudos to you for knowing and understanding. You put in some boundaries really for you, and you knew that's what you needed to kind of keep maybe your head on straight, keep your wits about you, grab hold of your bearings. And, kudos to you for honoring that while still being willing to venture into the unknown, venture into new territory. Humans, we try to steer clear of that often. Some of us, there comes a point where you really can't look away any longer, and you do have to figure out a way to navigate forward.
Yeah, absolutely.
You recently talked about, in a more poetic way, a more artistic way, your journey of your faith journey. And you wrote a Substack about it.
Yes.
And that is what I saw published and read through and was just so moved and so impressed by. I'm wondering if you can share with us a little backstory. What was going on for you? What led you to write that piece? And then we'll get to the point where I would love for you to share about that piece with our listeners.
Yeah, absolutely. So this spring, someone had recommended the book. It's called Rage Becomes Her, and it's a little humorous. As we have a small friend group that we always do reading recommendations, and someone's like, "Oh, you should read this." And I remember like finishing it and calling my friend and being like, "I'm so eager to discuss this. There's so many validating points to this book." Being a 43-year-old woman. And she was like, "I actually haven't read it." She's like, "I'm terrified to read it. I just recommended it to you, so you would be the first one to read it."
That was sneaky.
It was. But I think for the first time, I recognized how much anger I had packaged inside of me. I've had good experiences in the church, but I married young. I had kiddos young. I set aside a very promising career in landscape architecture, and stayed at home for 15 years. And I love those years, but a part of me died, right? And I think as I returned back into the workforce, I came back into the workforce at age 40, knowing that I could do both. I could be a mom and I could be a professional. And just seeing the years of, looking down the road of the years of what could have been.
Yeah.
And then just really looking at my experiences in the church. I spent a lot of years really working to be fully engaged and just coming up against the same almost systemic issues time and time again with patriarchy within the church. And it gets tiring, right? And you can feel that anger kind of seep up and begin to boil. And as women, not only in the church, but also in our culture, we're just told that there's no place for anger. Like, you need to push it down. But I think this past spring was really a turning point for me. I think, I can distinctly remember last fall, I gave myself permission to take a bit of a sabbatical from church, and that has been really healing. And by the spring, I thought I was ready to come back. And I remember sitting down and watching conference and just realizing how much my perspective had shifted, and that maybe there was no longer a place for me as a woman in the church.
Why do you think you thought that specifically, that there was no longer a place for me as a woman in the church?
Yeah, I think it's twofold. I think one, as my professional career continued outside of the church,
Okay.
I saw a mutual respect for men. I work in a very I work in farming, right? So I work in a very male dominated area, but I can tell you that you have to earn your respect within these circles, but when you do, you're equal. And I have served many years in word leadership callings, and also in the stake, and especially my last 5 years in stake communications. It's really hard to see that release and just see your work erased with a raise of a hand. And so I think by the spring, I was exhausted, and I could feel the anger start to seep. And I read this book and realized that a lot of the anger I had was valid, but I didn't know where to put it. And I didn't have a place to set it down and sort it out like you do with other things. And it was the spring. And so in Iowa, my parents, our family farm is now fourth generation, and a lot of the land is no longer farmed. It's very hilly. It probably should have never been farmed in the first place. And so we enrolled quite a few acres in the conservation reserve program. And in this particular program, we take what was cornfields and soy fields, and we return them to native Iowa prairie. And with that prairie, the program and the ecosystem both require burns at least once a year until they're well established.
Mm-hmm.
And so, as I'm coming out of this time of just really deep reflection and kind of pain, I had the opportunity to go back to my home, right? The soil that I was raised on. And if you're a farm kid, you know what it's like to go back to those fields. And
what is it like to go back for those of us that are not a farm
that are not farm fields? Oh yeah, absolutely. So to return to the fields that raised you, we always say there's blood, there's soil in your blood.
Okay.
And it beckons home, right? And when you return to the fields where you connected with the land and connected with God, it feels like home. It feels like every inch and every stream and where the birds nest, and it just feels like you're part of that ecosystem and part of that land. And it feels, more than anything, it feels safe.
I love that. Yeah, I love that.
So yeah, my dad called me up. I used to do a lot of burn work in my college years and outside, and it's kind of a young person's game. And this particular tract of land was 40 acres, so it's a pretty sizable amount. And there's hills and there's terraces and there's a lot that can go wrong. Fire is, sometimes fire has its own wandering way to get away from you. And so my dad had called me up to have an extra set of hands and someone who's had experience on the ground. And when we start prescribed burns, we start with what's called a back burn. And so we burn around the perimeter, and that perimeter burn is really kind of the safety net. Our goal is to consume the fuel. And so when the fire meets that initial burn line, there's nothing to burn, in hopes that it doesn't jump to barns and houses and homes and across roads. And the back burn takes a long time to do. Usually, 4 or 5 times the amount of the actual fire, but it's really critical. And as I was out in the back burn line, back burning is a lot of start a fire and put it out, start a fire and put it out, right? You essentially set dozens and dozens of small fires to ensure they don't get out of control. And, as I'm doing this process, and most of the time I am leading a back burn crew when I did burn, I just kind of related it to women. That's what we do. We see a fire and we're taught to extinguish it right away. That there's never the ability to let it burn and to let it grow into anything larger. Okay. As women, sometimes when a fire started, we're just taught to automatically put it out, to not let fires get too large. And it's the same with anger, right? And anger has no place to go. If your anger flashes, tamper it down. And as I'm in this back burn process, I really started to understand. I have daughters, and I have teenage daughters and younger ones too. And I started to understand, like, I do the same to them, right? They come home from a rough day at school and there's drama, and I'll always be like, let's simmer down. Let's take it down a notch. And realizing that, I do the same thing to the next generation, where my home should be a place where they can set that fire and let it burn in a safe place. And and so we're on this burn, and we're finishing the back burn. And usually a lot of women do the back burn, but not the main burn. Especially when I was younger, there wasn't a lot of women on fire lines. And for that particular night, I had the opportunity to start the fire. And when you drop a match and let it burn, I think there's an analogy that there comes a point of where you don't have control over it anymore. And the only thing that's going to keep that fire in line is your back burn. And I think a lot of that is like, faith and anger. And I wrote this a couple months ago. And so, and do you want me to read part of?
Sure, read whatever you would like. I would love that. Yeah.
let's do this. So when you get to the point of lighting the main fire, there's always a lot of things that go through your mind, and I'll read an excerpt of my writing.
Please do.
Okay. I stand overlooking 40 acres, now outlined in a string of smoke and fires. I tip the torch, watching the fire-infused oil drop into the grass. This is a moment of legal arson for men, but for women, it's sacred to light the world and watch it burn. I breathe in the smoke that now hangs thick in the air from the backburn and sharply exhale all the anger neatly packaged away. And for a moment, there is nothing but silence. I feel the prevailing wind at my back and the heat at my feet, making the flames flicker and climb. Within a minute, the stillness is overtaken by the deafening roar of destruction as the oxygen is consumed, and I watch an uncontrollable wall of fire originating from my actions. And what was just a tiny flame a moment ago is scorching an acre a minute. Dusk has fallen, the night sky turns pink, and it appears as if the sun is setting in the west and in the east tonight. I follow the wall of fire, walking across the now blackened earth. There is no horizon where the black earth now meets the black sky. The ground is still warm, with smoke emitting from what is still burning beneath. The landscape looks brutal, like a mistake that will never recover. I have scores of burns to reference, but there is always this moment when I think, this is absurd. This can't be right. What did I destroy? But I know the science, and I am reminded that we burn to heal, and we burn for growth. The fields will fall silent over the next few days. The birds will not sing, but within weeks, the charred earth will vanish and be replaced with a vibrant and thriving ecosystem.
Wow. That is just so amazing. What you said, you made a distinction between how men might approach the burn versus how women do. That for men, this is kind of just, all in a day's work.
It's fun. It's fun.
It's fun for them.
It's legal arson. It's fun.
Legal arson. Okay, yes. But you said for women, it's more sacred. Yes. It feels more sacred. Like, I think you said you're lighting the world on fire.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's so much symbolism here. You said normally women aren't participants in this type of a burn. And so you got to be not just an active participant, but your dad was relying on you for a major kind of leadership role in this because of your experience.
Yeah, the opportunity to physically drop a match in a field is, it's exhilarating, and I think it's also a lot of responsibility. And when I wrote this, obviously for me to release anger, sometimes my anger is released with a pencil to paper. But I thought about this, right? I thought about a lot of times as women in the church, we do see the fields burn, but it's typically one person, right? It's one person that lights a match and is out there and burns the field. And I think when we look at this analogy and look at how we do prescribed burns, like prescribed burns are a team effort. If you're one individual in a field with a match, you're an arsonist. But when you go in and you burn with a team and you have the communication you need to get those safety barriers in, it's no longer dangerous. It's helpful, and it's healing. And within the church, we have women who know how to burn. Where we really struggle is we don't teach other women the art of burning and how to do it correctly. A lot of times as we kind of go through these transitions and life experiences, we don't share them out of fear. And sometimes that fear is very valid, right? There's lost relationships and recourse on that.
Definitely.
But one thing I've thought, especially with teenage girls in my house, is like, how do I teach them to properly use their anger? And how do I teach them that there needs to be a connection with other women so the fire is controlled. And, when I look at fires, it's interesting because from the distance, prescribed burns look terrifying. That you have to call the fire department beforehand because they'll get dozens of calls, right? From a couple miles away, it looks like it's a disaster. But when you go in and you let all your neighbors know, the neighbors who get the message that it's happening, like they literally pull up a lawn chair and, a drink and watch it in awe. And so as I look at this and this experience I've had, I've really kind of thought, like, how can we put our anger to work and not let it just kind of simmer in our bodies and in the quiet spaces of our life? Fire does not have to be disastrous. It can do good. And when we talk about fire, it's the prescribed burns, the allowing things to burn on kind of a particular schedule or regiment. It helps plants. It helps weed control. I'm not a forest firefighter, but a lot of times when we look at the large forest fires that we're having, sometimes they're caused because we did not do burns or did not allow natural fires to burn for 80 plus years. And so there's a lot of fuel. And
when you say fuel, you're talking about there's a lot of brush. There's a lot of organic material that needs to be consumed by the fire and burned.
Yes.
Reprocessed, I guess.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. And the beautiful thing about prairie burns, we did this one in late April, and I returned in June, and there was no sign of the burn or damage. The ecosystem had been completely replenished within 8 to 10 weeks. And and growth happened again.
It was green, it was alive, it was flourishing, it was
the flowers were out, the weeds, we still have weeds, but more and more weeds were being suppressed through this particular practice. And
this is so fascinating to me. My mind is exploding. The symbolism is just unreal here. I mean, the thoughts are going so quickly. I can barely get them out, but I envision these little fires, not little, the controlled fires, like there's harmony there, there's intention there, there's love, there's care, there's, efforts to protect and to keep safe, but also to rebuild, see that long-term vision. And yes, I think you're so right. You said something to the effect that women can teach the art of burning to one another, but we often stay quiet. And I think you're right about that. You have mentioned that earlier in our discussion, how we're kind of taught just simmer down or keep that to yourself, or that anger's not okay, or that to be a good follower or believer or Christian even. This podcast is for all faith backgrounds. So I'll just say person of faith, that, we shouldn't feel those things or do something about them. And this is just so powerful. And the fact that you mentioned people will call the fire department, they see what's going on and they are alarmed. Their warning signals go off inside. And so they, they're calling it out and they're saying, seeing it as though maybe it shouldn't happen, which is interesting because I was going to say, you live in Iowa. Surely they are used to this sort of thing by now, especially at certain times of the year. But it's just an interesting human phenomena, right? We see danger and we're going to act. And sometimes that is even react. But the reality is nothing is going wrong in that situation. It's a natural process that is actually better for the ecosystem. Nature is just so wonderful in the lessons that we can learn from it. It's so fascinating. Change is good. Change brings the new birth of flowers, the new birth of growth, newness in all the ways. That hard, burnt field isn't a permanent state. Anyway, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing I love about just being in nature and the environment, right? And even as a kiddo, my first connections were God were never within a building. They were in the fields. It was sitting on the terraces, watching the sunset after planting with my dad and being out in the fields with my mom. And that's something I've had to grapple with too, right? For years and years, like the church was obviously my home, and I never felt fully at home and connected in a chapel or in the temple. I did it because that's where I was supposed to be and made it work. But I think also reclaiming, as I've gone through this process of being able to connect with God and with deity out among the trees and in the fields, and being able to feel their presence just in the beauty of nature, and allowing myself to have that experience and not necessarily be boxed in by the parameters of this is where you need to worship. And I think a lot of that's just how your brain is, your brain functions, right? And for some people, indoors where it's clean and quiet is where they have that experience. And for some of us, it's it's where you're next to the soil and the plants, that we have a very similar experience.
So if I can, I want to read from what you wrote that is posted.
Yeah, absolutely.
You write, the landscape looks brutal, like a mistake that will never recover. I have scores of burns to reference, but there is always a moment when I think this is absurd. This can't be right. I know the science, and I am reminded that we burn to heal. We burn for growth. These fields will fall silent over the next few days. The birds will not sing, and within weeks, the charred earth will vanish and be replaced with a vibrant and thriving ecosystem. If we look at that symbolically and apply that to, the fuel, as you say it, the brush, the whatever, the weeds, the grass, the dried, dead life, whatever that needs to be burned, if we apply that to our faith, I'll say our faith, our religious community, and then acknowledge that could be a good thing, right? You said there's always this moment when I think this is absurd and that this can't be right. But the next breath, the science.
It is. There is a moment when you light a fire and you can no longer control it, right? And you see this just wall of red in front of you. I don't know. There's always a moment that you think, what did I destroy?
Uh-huh.
And I think that's in our faith life too, right? As we have these transitions, and sometimes very natural transitions and growth periods in our faith life, sometimes as we start to deconstruct, it is very much of what did I destroy? What am I doing? What did I just burn to the ground? But the reality is, especially with fire with prairies, is if we just do these little fires like we do in the back burn, they don't really get hot enough or strong enough to burn the weeds, to suppress the weeds. We need a fire that's going to roll hot and fast to do the work. And so, doing the preparation to ensure that burn is done properly and is large enough to do what it's supposed to do. And prairies sometimes don't always burn evenly, right? There are lots of different plants and different fuels. And so sometimes burns don't go well because it's not that they get out of hand. It's because there wasn't enough strength in the fire to suppress the weeds or, to knock out the invasives. And so, there's always a time where there's a moment of fear and unsurety when we're burning. And I think the same goes in our faith life. But having that knowledge of what happens next and the growth that can come from it is what dispels the fear and allows us to keep on burning.
So I'm guessing that this is not linear, that even though a certain area of your land needs to have this controlled burn and then the all-encompassing burn that follows, doesn't mean necessarily that it won't need another one at some point in the future.
Yeah. In fact, these, depending on where you are in the prairie, new prairies are every year Established prairies are every 1 to 5 years.
Mm.
So it's a fairly, when you look at the Midwest, and at one point we have lost 99.9% of our native landscape due to farming. We are the most changed landscape in the world, interestingly enough. But when you think of the Midwest before pre-white settlement, it was millions of acres of grassland. And it burned naturally quite often from fires or from lightning. And so what we work to do is reestablish what that natural burn system was that no longer can happen because our ecosystem is now so fragmented due to both settlement and farming.
Wow, that's kind of unbelievable. It's the most changed landscape. So I'm wondering, when the fire is over and the fields do fall silent and all you see is charred earth, what are some of the thoughts that have gone through your head? What helps you be reassured, or what brings you hope or peace or just comfort, I guess?
Yeah, absolutely. I think in the actual field, it's the knowledge that within a couple months, there's regeneration, and what is coming through that charred mat on the earth is what we want to see. It's the plants that were meant to thrive in this particular environment and in this habitat. And so, you know what will come next because of that experience. And I think for me, in the world of faith, sometimes burning is scary because we don't know what comes next, right? We've always, I've always had one answer and one path. And it took me some time to be able to be comfortable with the uncomfortable. It took me, in fact, quite a few years to be comfortable with saying, I don't know. I don't know, but I'm willing to be patient, and I'm willing to see the beauty that rises from beneath the ashes.
Wow. I love that you said that the plants or seeds that were meant to thrive through the fire are the ones that will come up. I was actually going to say, I mean, obviously something has to survive. Otherwise the field wouldn't necessarily turn green again when it's all over. Obviously tons more symbolism there. The seeds and the plants and the growth that survived that fire, they're the enduring, hardy species. Though they have the strong plant DNA, we could say. Just so fascinating that if we can trust in nature and that process that has been going on for ages, just ages. I truly believe God teaches us in story, in parable, in metaphor. And if we can see these things in other realms of our natural world, why wouldn't they also exist and happen in other areas of life?
Yeah. And I think the interesting thing is, when you have this experience and knowledge, you know what's going on. And so in this particular burn, most of the farm neighbors out there, they know what a CRP burn is. They're doing it on their land if it's in the program. But on this particular one, there was a new neighbor who had moved out from a more urban center. And, he was so concerned. He was so, why would you do this? This looks horrible. Why would you burn so much habitat for animals? And that's part of the reason we do the back burn too, right? It kind of gives animals and species in that area a heads up that the big fire is coming. And I think too, when we look at faith, there's this right now in my own life, I'm standing in the ashes. The burn is done. And I'm in this very transitional phase of kind of my religious life and my belief. And I see people see me standing in these proverbial ashes, right?
Yeah.
And, they think I've lost everything and nothing will grow again. But I have the hope that what comes through are the beautiful things, the things that are meant to be there. And through this process, they'll be stronger, and they'll be stronger.
Definitely. I love this different lens you've helped us to see deconstruction through. It can have a negative connotation to it. I mean, I had a negative connotation attached to this idea of deconstruction. I suppose it was fear-based, but just at the heart of the definition, it's, you're just taking something apart and you're putting it back together. And like you just said, you're intentional about what goes back into the construction, the new that you've created or are creating. And that process may never actually be done done in this life. Like, even though you're standing in the ashes right now, that's this burn, right? Maybe there's another one, not to like,
Yeah.
It's not linear. It's an ongoing thing.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think the first burn it's scary, right? Even if you're
Probably.
trained.
Yep,
It's
true. That is
wild and scary, and the more experiences you have, I think you know what the second chapter is. And
right.
a
That's
little
an
more
excellent point.
what to expect.
Yeah, so true. That's an excellent point. Yeah. The first burn is probably the scariest, I guess. Yeah. Wow, I have felt so many things as we have been talking. Anything else that you can think of that you would like to leave with our listeners that maybe you haven't had a chance to share?
I think one thing you use the phrase, I'm curious to know. And that's a phrase I use a lot too, both when I'm doing some deep soul searching, but also as I talk to people in my life. So what we have found is faith journeys and transitions and deconstruction is difficult and complex for everyone. And it's hard for spouses. It's hard for the individual. It's hard for spouses. It's hard for kiddos. It's hard for friends. It's especially hard for parents. And I think especially for mamas. And, if I've learned anything through this experience, it's empathy, and to understand that as one person shifts, everyone around them is having to shift. And how we shift is very much resembles how our relationship will be. And so as we go through this process, and we're down the road, right? We're a good 4 years into this. My personal motto is always relationships over ritual. It is our goal with those who are really struggling with where we are right now, or where my husband is right now, that we're here and we're present. And it is our goal to be good daughters and sons and friends, and to also respect their journeys as they start to, have to shift to understand and deal with what may look like empty chairs at the table. And
That's a great motto. Relationships over a ritual. That's a great motto. So I always like to ask my guests one final question, and that is, what does it mean to you to live beyond the shadow of doubt?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think for me, it's to live in the moment and not to allow fear to lead.
I resonate with that. I totally do. I have loved this. I'm just still processing what we've been talking about. If you're okay with it, I'd love to leave a link to your Substack article in our show notes.
Absolutely. And I am not a writer, so my Substack is pretty thin. I have a couple articles on there. So I would say my Substack is for people who want to read an article like once every 4 months. I might be your gal. Yeah, I am. Yeah. But it's been, to be able to pen some of my experiences onto paper. It's been very beneficial to me. And, my hope is in putting it publicly is that my hope is it will help someone else.
I know it will. It's helped me. So I thank you for that. I thank you for being willing to, we could say, be a part of this slow, controlled burn, setting up your fire and sharing your story, being vulnerable, being open, and by so doing, encouraging others to, first of all, own their story to themselves, even if it's just internally, and then eventually share it with others. It's a beautiful thing.
Thank you.
I always like to throw out a few questions so our listeners can get to know you. I'm just looking for 1 to 2 word answers if you're game.
Okay.
The first one is, what is your favorite book?
Oh, my favorite book. My favorite crawl up and snowstorm book is Sand County Almanac. It's an environmental book. My favorite fun book is probably The Man Who Crawled Out the Window and Disappeared.
Those are 2 I've never heard of. Now I'm going to have to go look them up. And would you consider yourself an introvert or an extrovert?
We just did this for work. I am an INTJ, so I'm an introvert.
Wow. I'm kind of in the middle. And who is your favorite artist?
Ooh, my favorite artist, like music artist or?
Yeah, you get to pick.
Okay, so probably my private obsession, what I turn on when I run, is Black Eyed Peas.
That's great. I love Black Eyed Peas.
Women of the 90s, right?
Totally.
Yep.
And would you consider yourself a night owl or a morning lark?
Oh, I farm. I am a 4:45, let's get emails started type of woman.
Of course you are.
Yep.
Wow. And who's your favorite? I'm sorry, your celebrity crush?
Oh, I don't know if I have one. I don't watch a lot of TV, so I don't know. I don't even know who's around these days.
You're out in the field.
I'm out in the field. It's farm season. I have like no social interaction or free time in the summer.
And that is just fine. Do you do still or carbonated water, or are you a diet soda fan?
I am a carbonated water fan.
Good for you. Do you have a favorite, like with flavors? La Croix or
I don't know. I'm also an Aldi fan, and so I just buy the 12-pack.
Whatever they have.
Whatever's flavored. I don't like the plain stuff.
And finally, the furthest place you've traveled.
Oh, we took our kiddos to Croatia this year, which was really an amazing experience. Yep. So got to spend some time on the Adriatic Sea and up in the mountains. Got to drive a 9-passenger van, 900 kilometers across Croatia, which was a thrilling and terrifying experience in itself.
Wow. How amazing. I would love to visit Croatia. Well, Emily, it's been a pleasure to have this conversation with you and to dive a little deeper into these concepts that you have so eloquently put to pen. I'm really excited for more people to be exposed to them and share with their friends. I truly hope it spreads like wildfire, maybe a controlled burn in the beginning, but I'm okay with, in this case, it's spreading like wildfire. So much wisdom, so much to consider and ponder on. It's really been fantastic. So thank you for taking time out of your schedule. Thank you for being here. And thank you for owning your story and sharing it.
Yeah. And thank you for the invite and the opportunity to talk and discuss and connect. I think of when I started kind of this journey, there wasn't a lot of resources out there and it felt very alone. Mm-hmm. And so I appreciate you being able to connect people and make us all realize that we're not alone.
We're not.
This is a community and a journey we can do together and carry the load between each other.
Yes, absolutely. I have found that too. We are a community.
If you come from a high demand background, it's possible you haven't taken the opportunity to thoughtfully consider your core values. Brené Brown said, living into our values means that we do more than profess our values. We practice them. We walk our talk. We are clear about what we believe and hold important, and we take care that our intentions, words, thoughts, and behaviors align with those beliefs, end quote. Identifying your core values is like thinking ahead of time. It reduces decision fatigue. It becomes your North Star, guiding you as you navigate new decisions or decisions you've come to realize that perhaps you didn't get to choose in the first place. Click the link in the show notes for my Determine Your Values guide. It will help you take the first steps to living a values-driven and aligned life by helping you identify what matters most to you. Beyond the Shadow of Doubt podcast is a proud member of the Dialogue Podcast Network, which is part of the Dialogue Journal found at dialoguejournal.com. Founder Eugene England was a Mormon writer, teacher, and scholar who wrote, "My faith encourages my curiosity and awe. It thrusts me out into relationship with all creation and encourages me to enter into dialogue. My hope is that this podcast is an extension of that vision." Hopeful Spaces is a Dallas Hope Charities component of Hopeful Discussions, sponsored by Mercedes-Benz Financial Services USA. It's a free monthly parent, ally, or caregiver support group facilitated by Megan Skidmore Coaching. Email chc@dallashopecharities.org for more info. Visit meganskidmorecoaching.com to find this podcast and additional free resources, including the link for a complimentary coaching session. Follow me on Facebook or Instagram for more or to send me a DM. Help the podcast grow. Please follow, review, and share with a friend.